catch would must have been an optical illusion to a lot of people.
Because of career, Willie Mays, 24 All-Star Game selections, 300-plus lifetime average, and a lot of that was done when the pitching mound was fucking 10 feet in the air, seemingly, and offense went down. Willie Mays, though, that catch of Vic Wertz in the first game of the 1954 World Series, I remember seeing that as a kid. And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to episode 218 of the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Wednesday afternoon here with me in New York. We're going to skip past all that commercial, promotional jazz and go right to the guts of the episode, which, unfortunately, a bit of a somber tone, because as a lifelong baseball fan, as a baseball historian, as a New Yorker, the passing of Willie Mays is a very consequential event. And so much of the fun of baseball is arguing about it. And unlike politics, unlike religion, unlike sex, baseball arguments are fun. I have never been involved in a baseball debate or argument that ended in anything other than two people disagreeing. I don't remember getting into any fights. Well, no, I don't remember. I never got into any fights. And I don't recall there ever being any acrimony or bad blood. So there are things that baseball fans and purists discuss. There are theories, concepts, phrases we throw around that are not absolute. They are simply accepted as reality, even though it's really just an opinion. So for decades, not really Willie Mays' contemporary, he was older, but for decades, Joseph Paul DiMaggio, Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee Clipper, was informally known as the greatest living ball player. And when Joe DiMaggio passed in 1999, so the jolter has been gone 25 years, it was generally accepted that Willie Mays was the next greatest living ball player. There were some that would say Ted Williams. Ted Williams may have been the greatest hitter, the greatest offensive player who ever lived. But Ted Williams wasn't that great of an outfielder. He did not have a great throwing arm. He didn't have super speed. What Ted Williams did incredibly well was hit for power. He drew a shit ton of walks. Ted Williams was the perfect player for the sabermetrics era 60 years before the sabermetrics era, before any kind of metrics were used to determine value, batting average, home runs, on-base percentage, OPS. Ted Williams and Babe Ruth were the OPS gods, if we go back in time and we just look at their numbers. But Willie Mays, it's an easy argument, should have unanimously been declared the greatest living ball player when Joseph Paul DiMaggio passed away in 1999. And look, there are plenty of people who would argue, and this is what I mean about the debate. These are normally fun debates. These are debates where we can throw stats and we can argue comparing stats in different eras and what is a true five-tool player, all of these different things. If I'm asked the question, out of the three greatest center fielders who ever lived, and by that, I don't just mean that they could play the outfield, but all-around players, center fielders. They all played New York. 2 New York Yankees and 1 New York and then San Francisco Giant in Willie Mays. Mickey Mantle, Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays. If I'm asked the question, who was the most dominant of those 3 players when they were in their prime? The answer is probably Mickey Mantle. Now, Mickey Mantle was kind of a 4-tool player. But the thing with Mantle was his 4 tools were so absurd. The fact Mantle's power was impossible. And his speed was impossible. Mantle had Olympic sprinter speed. In a different iteration of the Matrix where Mickey Mantle simply decided to become an Olympic athlete, he was that level of talent. He could have been a 100-meter sprinter. He could have been a decathlete. Mickey Mantle was he was impossibly talented, as was Willie Mays, but they didn't have exactly the same skill sets. Joe DiMaggio was different than the other two. Joe didn't have blazing speed. He had a good arm. He didn't have as strong of an arm as Willie Mays. But it was always said, the book on DiMaggio was that he had the greatest instincts of any outfielder. Anyone who ever watched him play the outfield saw. DiMaggio had an almost magical ability to know exactly where a ball was going to end up when it was struck. They said he did it better than anybody. He said he almost never saw him make what appeared to be a difficult catch. Joe was always ready to catch the ball. But it's neither here nor there. DiMaggio was considered the greatest living ball player for decades until he passed, and then Willie Mays. In his absolute prime, Mickey Mantle was a more dominant player. He was a more dominant player than Willie Mays. Was he ever a more dominant player than prime Joe DiMaggio? I mean, maybe. Maybe because he ran faster. But when you compare the career numbers, and it's a bit skewed. Willie Mays lost 2 years due to military service. Now, there was a time where it appeared that Willie Mays was going to break Hank Aaron's, at the time, home run record. Well, Hank Aaron was, you know what, I didn't even say that right. He was going to break Babe Ruth's record. Not Hank Aaron's record, it was Babe Ruth's record. Hank Aaron was Willie Mays' contemporary. And there were people who argued that Hank Aaron was every bit as good a baseball player as Willie Mays. There were those that said Frank Robinson was as good a baseball player as whoever lived. Again, this is just conjecturing. We compare numbers and all of that sort of stuff. But Willie ended up with 660 homers. Babe hit 714. Hank Aaron got to 755. But there was a period in the mid-60s where it looked like Willie Mays was going to be able to make a run for it, and he didn't. Injuries, health issues took their toll on him. And Willie took great care of himself. This should be pointed out. But Hank Aaron had more longevity. But few would argue that prime Hank Aaron was better than Willie Mays. I mean, no, he wasn't. Hank Aaron benefited from hitting and spending a significant amount of his career and big years playing in a ballpark that was known as the launching pad. Balls used to fly out of Fulton County Stadium. Willie didn't exactly play in a bandbox for very much of his career. Candlestick Park was not, Candlestick Park was known as a pitcher's park. The wind would be blowing in as opposed to blowing out more often than not. Pitchers used to talk about it. But the idea is, Mays was a dominant player in his own right, that he was an immensely gifted player. And we talk about five-tool players. And Willie Mays was a true five-tool player. To give you some more contemporary examples, Alex Rodriguez, love him or hate him, never going to the Hall of Fame, I know. But Alex Rodriguez was a five-tool player. He was not a normal big talent. There was a reason why Alex Rodriguez was such a huge prospect and actualized his potential. And same with Barry Bonds, same with Roger Clemens. There is an iteration of Alex Rodriguez's career where his body weight never really goes much above 195 to 200. Because Alex was a naturally physically impressive guy, but not necessarily hugely muscled. There was a version of The Matrix in which A-Rod never took any pharmaceutical enhancements and just had a normal, spectacular career, as Barry Bonds was on his way to a normal, spectacular career before he suddenly became turbocharged Barry Bonds. But Alex Rodriguez was a great fielder. It is underappreciated just how good that guy was with the glove. He was quick to either side, unlike, his frenemy, Derek Jeter. Great arm, could move to his right, but Derek had trouble and staggered when he went to his left often. A-Rod was smooth as silk out there in the field. He had a fucking cannon for an arm. He had a fucking cannon. I bet he could have been a pitcher throwing 95. Rodriguez had a howitzer for a throwing arm. He ran like the wind, and he hit for average and for incredible power. Contemporary players, Mike Trout, Aaron Judge, five-tool players. Aaron Judge can really run. He has a rifle throwing arm. He's a great defensive outfielder, just in terms of catching the ball. As Mike Frances would say, he can catch the ball, he can catch the ball. Hit for average, hit for power. Willie Mays did everything perfectly. He was a perfect baseball player. And if there are those who want to argue that Willie Mays was the greatest all-around player who ever lived, It's more than just numbers. Willie had a really long prime and a long near prime. That's what separates him from Mickey Mantle, for example, because he and Mickey were both rookies right around the same time. They played against each other in the 1951 World Series. You want to talk about the baseball gods and the universe almost playing tricks? How could that happen? The two New Yorkers, the two kids who had enormous talent, both headed for iconic, legendary status, Hall of Fame careers, and they were friends. They were friends for decades, and Mickey, unfortunately, has been gone almost 30 years. But they face off in the very first World Series, 1951. Joe DiMaggio's last season. Like, how do these things happen? You have Game 1 of the World Series, Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle in Yankee Stadium's outfield. Joe was still playing center, even though it should have been Mickey. Joe really couldn't move around that well. He wasn't that old. Joe was 35 going on 36. But he was done. He'd had heel issues. Joe took good care of himself, but he aged quickly. One thing that separates Mays from DiMaggio is the fact that Joe's prime, was about 10 years. Mays' prime was, or near prime, I should say, was like 15 years. It was absurd. The guy was still putting up huge numbers in the mid-60s. He had debuted 15 years earlier. Derek Jeter kind of did that, but Derek Jeter was not the offensive force. He was not anywhere near the dynamic player of Willie Mays. I mean, few are. But the main comparison being with Mantle and DiMaggio to Willie Mays, especially because they played in New York, and they are all legendary figures, not just in baseball, but in sports folklore. And unlike DiMaggio, Willie Mays had the advantage of that technology was improving as his career went forth. And his catch in the 1954 World Series Game 1 off of Vic Wertz, it probably won the Giants that game, and he ended up sweeping the series. Getting to see that catch, it added and continues to add to the mythology of Willie Mays. Now, Willie Mays always said, I made a lot better catches than that in my career. He argues that he made an even better play later in that game where he cut a ball off in the gap that he kind of intimated no outfielder in history would have been able to get to that ball in the gap. It's the best break I ever got on a ball. And it was the same batter, Vic Wertz. But Mays is remembered for the over-the-shoulder catch. It is unfortunate when you have someone like that who is reduced in some ways to a clip, a brief highlight reel. Because a career, Willie Mays, 24 All-Star Game selections, 300-plus lifetime average, and a lot of that was done when the pitching mound was fucking 10 feet in the air, seemingly, and offense went down. Willie Mays, though, that catch of Vic Wertz in the first game of the 1954 World Series, I remember seeing that as a kid. When the 1954 World Series was less than 3 decades in the past. It's hard to imagine a time where I was aware of the world and 1954 was closer to the present than 1996 is now. The 1996 World Series doesn't feel like it's going on 28 years ago. Charlie Hayes staggering under Mark Lemke's foul pop. He could have caught the first one. We could have lost that fucking game and we could have lost that World Series. Charlie Hayes could have made a play on Lemke's first pop, would have ended the World Series the previous, was it 1 pitch before or 2? But Hayes stumbled and staggered at that first one, and it went into the dugout. I'm telling you, he could have caught that ball. And I thought we were fucked. Because Mark Lemke, they didn't call Mark Lemke Little October for nothing. What a great nickname, Little October. I thought Lemke was going to tie the game with a hit and a home run, and we were fucked. Because Mariano had already pitched, and Wetland was not the same Wetland that he had been earlier in his career. But Charlie Hayes squeezing Lemke's second pop-up. This is a digression. The single greatest moment of my baseball rooting life. When I realized that Charlie Hayes was going to catch that pop and end that World Series, now almost 28 years ago. I saw Willie Mays' catch. And it wasn't just me. Kids watching the 1981 World Series. We came into school the next day. We were talking about Willie Mays. In 1981, October, we weren't talking about the Yankee game. Yeah, the Yanks lost game 3. We started practicing the Willie Mays catch. We didn't really practice the Willie Mays catch, but the theory was hit the ball over our heads and let's see if we can make a catch with our left arm, or our right arm if we are the opposite hand, with our arm extended, or just catch it over the shoulder with both hands and turn around and fire it back to the infield. Say, hey, Willie. He was already iconic. He'd been retired 8 years, but it seemed longer. And there were Met fans that were aggravated that they didn't really get to see the real Willie Mays because he was at the end, playing in the 1973 World Series. They wouldn't have thrown him out there just on name recognition. He could still play, just, it wasn't as quick in the outfield. There was a play kind of fucked up. The ball got lost in the sun. There were Met fans still angry. You see my hero, Willie Mays, stumbling around in the outfield. Unfortunately, baseball could be a very unforgiving sport, but it's not as unforgiving as boxing, because if you play baseball for too long, what's the worst thing that happens? Yeah, you strike out a lot. Mickey Mantle physically couldn't play anymore. He's hobbling around the field. The guy's 34, 35 years old. He can barely walk, and he's out there playing baseball. But still, it's still better than taking Rocky Marciano, Susie Q to the face, like Joe Louis when Joe shouldn't have been fighting anymore. It's not the same thing. As a Yankee fan who appreciates the history, 1951, Mickey Mantle's rookie year, Willie Mays, I think it was his rookie year. You know what? Because I hate giving you bad information. I don't want to. It could have been that his rookie year was 1950, but let's just check this out. Yeah, you see, Google has Willie Mays' rookie year because they're going to tell you how much a mint condition, uncirculated Willie Mays rookie baseball card is worth. Okay, so technically, Mays was a rookie in 1948. So he was only 17 years old. That is fucking insane. You want to talk about otherworldly talent. Now, the Mick was 19 going on 20. That's still impressive. But man, Mays was a rookie in 1948. So he was still a very young player in 51. During that famous season, that was the year the Dodgers had a 13.5 game lead over Willie's New York Giants, not the football team. The New York Giants baseball team played at the Polo Grounds. The New York Giants football team played where? They played at Yankee Stadium. But 1951 was Willie Mays' first World Series appearance. And this came right in what turned out to be the middle of the New York Yankees' absurd 5-year run of winning the World Series every year. That's something you're not going to see again with all layers of playoffs. 1949, the Yanks beat the Dodgers in 5. 1950, Yanks beat the Phillies. 1951, we arrive at. And the Giants were 13.5 games down. And Willie, I believe, had a big year that year. I'm going to look that up. I'm pretty sure that Willie was their best player in 1951. But they're down 13.5. They make this incredible comeback. And then Major League Baseball does something that I think was, Willie was not quite yet at his legendary status. He played 121 games and, he wasn't quite in his prime. It's like, I remember when Ken Griffey Jr. first came up in 1989, there was an idea that he was a finished product. Well, he looked like a finished product, but he had more development to come. And Willie Mays, his first year where he played like Willie Mays was 1954, the year of the over-the-shoulder catch. But the 51 World Series, because it had DiMaggio and Mantle and Mays, ironically, none of them were anywhere near their prime. It was Joe's last year. The Giants got to the World Series and made this incredible comeback from 13.5 games out behind the Dodgers. And what baseball did, which I was just teasing, and I got, again, sidetracked. I'm sorry for the frequent sidetracks, but it's difficult when you have so many things you want to say at the same time. It's tough. But Major League Baseball, rather than just have a knockout game, which I would have expected. I remember the first time I read about the 1951 playoffs, as Jim Moore famously said, "You kidding me? Playoffs? I just hope we can win a game." When the Dodgers and Giants finished tied at the end of the 1951 season, they played a 3-game best of 3 playoff, or play-in, if you prefer. 1978, Yanks Red Sox. They played a knockout game, but it was game number 163 of the 1978 regular season. So I don't know the mechanics of why they played a 3-game playoff with the Dodgers and Giants in 51. I have no idea, because the Yankees won the American League in a cakewalk that year. They just kind of ran over everybody. I don't understand that. But the most famous home run in baseball history, the shot heard around the world, Bobby Thompson's 3-run homer off Ralph Branca. The Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant. The famous home run call by Russ Hodges. Willie Mays was on that team. That's how Willie got into the 51 World Series. And the irony, this is not a good irony. We think in terms of changing of the guard with the New York Yankees, and often in sports, in baseball, as Willie Mays, the later era Willie Mays, was the best player, and in his teammate and his buddy, Willie McCovey, Stretch, kind of supplanted him as the San Francisco Giants' best player. I mean, McCovey was an absolute monster baseball player. But in that 51 World Series, early in Game 1, Mickey Mantle, the Commerce Comet, was told by Casey Stengel, the old professor, the Yankee manager, a man who looked like he was 60 when he was still in his 30s, he was told, "Kid, I can't take Joe out of center, but you catch every ball you think you can get. If you hear Joe signal for it, you stay away. But if you think you've got a break on a ball, you go get the ball." And unfortunately, Mantle got his foot, he kind of hit his foot on a drain pipe from the sprinkler system, which was pretty fucking primitive in 1951. And Mantle went down. The cliche would be that the old player got hurt and the young buck took over. Well, unfortunately, in the 51 World Series, Mantle fucked up his leg in the first game. He didn't play in that World Series after that. He could have been seriously injured. He could have torn his ACL. That would have impacted the rest of his career. He got really lucky. Even though he didn't really get that lucky, because Mantle had had osteomyelitis, and Mantle's father was dead before he was 40, as was his grandfather. Mickey Mantle was very much a troubled and star-crossed individual. But Willie Mays, as I said, had an incredibly long prime, putting up big numbers so many years, and always playing similar to Joe DiMaggio, with a certain grace and style and class. And Joe DiMaggio was not necessarily the warmest individual. There were a lot of people who, they kind of complained that, Joe was cold. Joe wasn't that great with the press. Maybe the Marilyn Monroe, maybe that kind of hurt him, that he started to close up after his marriage failed. Nobody really knows what goes on in the mind of somebody. But Willie Mays was not that. Willie Mays was a people person. His nickname, the Say Hey Kid, was apt. He's somebody who genuinely seemed to enjoy the side of being a major sports figure that a lot of people never became comfortable with. And the only real kind of scandal or controversy that he was involved in, he was involved with also with Mickey Mantle. And the commissioner of baseball in the late 1970s into the early 80s was a guy who was competent. He had some good ideas. His name was Bowie Kuhn. And here's the thing with baseball, and this kind of thing comes up anytime somebody says the phrase, Pete Rose needs to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, what my opinion is on Rose, no. Hall of Fame player, but you can't do what he did. There is a reason why certain rules in baseball are in place, but that doesn't mean that something other than that very specific cardinal sin is what it is. It shouldn't apply to other stuff. Okay, so the cardinal sin of baseball, and we just saw it, was it a guy in the Padres or the Pirates? You can't bet on baseball. That is a permanent expulsion from the game. And that did not happen in a vacuum. That is because the 1919 Chicago White Sox who had been fucked over repeatedly by their team owner, Charlie Comiskey, a real fucking scumbag, tightwad piece of shit. They conspired with gamblers to not put their best effort into the 1919 World Series, a World Series that we're led to believe they probably would have won easily because they were playing at about 60% capacity and still extended the series. It was the best out of 9. They still extended it to 8 games. They were so good that even making the occasional errors, because they couldn't just completely tank it, they had to at least make it look like they were trying. But because of the so-called Black Sox scandal, because the sport nearly died, were it not for Babe Ruth, still the greatest baseball player who ever lived. I don't care what anybody says. You can have your Shohei Ohtani, you can take your Mike Trout, and yes, even the great Willie Mays. Babe Ruth saved the fucking sport. Harry Frazee stupidly selling him to the Yankees was the first act of the baseball gods to save that sport, if you believe in such things. But after the Black Sox scandal, the sport, the commissioner back then, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, other commissioners such as Ford Frick, they were very careful about any association between baseball, officially, because there's always sports betting, don't get me wrong, but any official connection between their sport and organized crime or above-board gambling, just didn't want any of it. So after Willie retired, and, you know, he was in the Hall of Fame. Of course, he was a first ballot inductee. The fact that there were writers who didn't vote for Willie Mays for the Hall, are you fucking kidding me? He wasn't unanimous. The first unanimous selection was Mariano Rivera. How is that possible? But then again, how could somebody have not voted for DiMaggio? How could somebody have not voted for Mantle? How could somebody have not voted for Ted Williams? Well, Ted Williams was an asshole. What the hell does that have to do with it? What? That's why you said no, because he was an asshole? In the early 1980s, Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays worked for, I want to say it was the Sands in Atlantic City. I could be wrong. I know it was Atlantic City. They wanted to stay close to the East Coast, especially Mantle, who worked for the Yankees on and off. He used to be a color commentator on select games. We always looked forward to listening to Mickey. He often had great stories and that kind of classic Oklahoma drawl. I don't know if Willie Mays ever got into TV as much as even Mickey. But they worked as greeters for Atlantic City casinos, and they were paid good money. I remember reading, even back in the day, I think that Mickey and Willie got paid at least $200,000 a year. Now, they didn't work full-time, but what they did was they sat with the big gamblers, and they were just supposed to be friendly to them. Just tell stories. And Mickey seemed to really enjoy it. I don't know if Willie ever really liked it, but it goes to show you that even as successful as Willie was, his career ended before baseball players and other athletes made the kind of money that when you retire at age 35, at age 40, you don't have to ever work another day. You can literally do whatever you want for the rest of your life. Willie didn't reach that era. Neither did Mickey. Willie got closer, but neither did Mickey. So you have a certain lifestyle. You want to support and do things maybe for your kids. You want to put them through college without them taking it, whatever it might be. They went to work for a casino. Mickey probably liked to gamble. He liked the free liquor. We know that he was somebody that had a lot of problems with substances, but Bowie Kuhn, that wasn't the issue. Bowie Kuhn suspended Willie fucking Mays and Mickey Mantle simply for having that job. It was above board. They weren't hiding anything. The guys were making TV commercials. And high-rolling gamblers were talking about how much they loved getting to meet these guys. But Bowie didn't want any association with it. It's the reason why Bowie Kuhn didn't go that much further as commissioner, because the baseball world at large would not tolerate that. The level of disrespect, in this instance, more so towards Willie Mays. We love Mickey, but we knew Mickey had a lot of problems. If Willie Mays needed the $200,000 a year, you let him make his fucking money. Get the fuck out of here. So Peter Ueberroth came in, and the first thing he did was reinstate Mantle and Mays. And that is the only, that's not even a scandal. The commissioner of baseball just decided to be an asshole, thinking that he was protecting the legacy of the sport. Fuck you. Glad they got rid of him. But the baseball world is a bit dimmer. the effervescent smile, the fantastic physique. If you've ever seen any pictures of Willie Mays shirtless, never worked out with weights. The guy was a genetic mega superior who worked his tail off to build and then maintain an incredible level of skill longer than almost anyone who ever played baseball. Maybe you could argue Ted Williams was similar. Ted Williams hit 388 when he'd already been in the league 20 years. Like, that's fucking crazy. But Willie Mays was he was an incredible baseball player, a great personality, somebody who really helped to grow and build the great game of baseball. I believe the greatest game. It's not America's pastime for nothing. It may suck on TV if you're not a fan, but I will never burn for any other sport the way that I do for baseball, the way that I do for the Yankees. And Willie Mays will never be forgotten. And you want to argue who is the greatest living player now? I'm going to go Ken Griffey Jr. I mean, right now, if I got a gun to my head, name the 4 greatest center fielders who ever lived in order, I'm going to take Joe DiMaggio first. Mays second, Mantle third, Jr., Griffey fourth. I believe today, Ken Griffey Jr. woke up. Unofficially, he's the greatest living ball player. Just my opinion. It's better than Pete Rose. You start going to the old school guys, because the oldest Hall of Famer right now is Louis Aparicio. You got some great players still there, but most of the real greats, Hank Aaron, Frank Roberts, these guys are gone. You know, it's sad. Not all of them made it into their 80s, into their 90s. Willie had pretty good health well into his 80s, into his late 80s. But Willie Mays, the Say Hey Kid, passed away yesterday at 93. The baseball world mourns, but a generation of young people who only knew the name are now going to see clips and highlights of his remarkable achievements, of his extraordinary gifts, and the decades of excellence on a baseball diamond. This has been episode 218 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Wednesday afternoon here with me in New York. If you caught this episode on the audio platform such as Spotify or iTunes, don't forget to click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the YouTube channel, same general rule applies. I'll be back with episode 219 real soon. Till then, peace.